Right, welcome back everybody. Today is the second and the last day of the public hearings taking place at the Johannesburg City Hall in Gauteng on South Africa's policy since 1994. This is in line with the decision that was taken by Parliament in January to appoint a panel to assess the effectiveness of the legislation that has been passed by Parliament and the Provincial Legislatures since 1994. The public hearings are part of the review process that's intended to look at reviewing the country's economic scenario to basically have a look and accelerate change in South Africa. Joining us now in studio, we're very honoured to have him, the former President of South Africa, Kgalema Motlanthe, and the head of the panel for the Assessment of Key Legislation. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you, Leanne, for inviting me, and morning to your viewers as well.
It's an absolute pleasure. This is it's been a busy period for you, Johannesburg now being the fifth stop in this journey. How's it been so far?
Well, it's been very hectic, I must say. As you know, we are about 17 of us on the panel, and we divided ourselves into 3 working groups in accordance with the mandate that was given to us, which is to assess impact and efficacy of legislation in 4 broad areas. The first being poverty, unemployment and inequality, and the second being creation of and equitable distribution of wealth, and the third is land reform, distribution and restitution, as well as tenure rights. And the fourth and last area of focus is nation building and social cohesion or exclusion. So we in our assessment felt that the 2 first areas of focus are so closely interlinked that they could be handled by one working group. So we have working group 1 focusing on those 2 areas, and working group 2 focusing on the land question, and working group 3 focusing on the nation building and social cohesion aspect of our mandate.
Yeah, you've got an incredible panel that you're working together with. I mean, the 17-member panel, including yourself. We've got the likes of, just to name a few, Tito Mboweni, our former Reserve Bank governor, Bridget Mabandla, former cabinet minister, Judge Navi Pillay, Professor Harun Borat, Dr. Olive Shisana. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I could talk about Terence Nombembe as well, Professor Vivian Taylor. It's a high-level delegation. At the end of the day, we talk about that mandate. You mentioned the mandate. What is the mandate? What was the mandate you've been given?
Well, the mandate is to, assess impact of legislation. In other words, what is the lived experience of South Africans in their organized formations as individual citizens, in terms of whether, legislation has actually served as an enabler to improve the quality of their lives, or as an impediment. So, we've asked for written submissions from experts and research units from universities and stakeholders, and we also interact with Chapter 9 institutions, which deal with impact of legislation on an ongoing basis. If you take the Commission for Gender Equality, they would have records and records of how legislation protects or fails to protect women and children. So the panel's mandate is really to assess that kind of impact. And we felt that over and above accessing all of these records, we should also have outreach programs where we interact with South Africans, and in the main we listen rather than to talk. So
to talk. I mean, because it is to listen. I mean, I've read stories.
It's a listening campaign, really.
Hundreds of people coming, talking to you, traveling long distances, sharing their life stories and telling you what is working and what isn't working. And that's the question I want to ask you. I mean, obviously, you've managed to travel to a good few provinces now.
Yes.
You would have done 6 out of the provinces by the end of this year.
That's right.
What are the things, the pressing issues that are coming up from South Africans that they would like to see change, that is hampering development for them?
Well, some of the key issues is a question of land ownership,
Yeah.
particularly for the African communities who were historically excluded from holding title deeds in recognition of their ownership of any piece of land and so on. Others, feel let down by just poor implementation of legislation.
Yeah.
People who experience farm evictions, for instance, when they go to, and these would be people who would have lived and worked on those farms for generations. And once ownership changes, they get thrown off those farms with nowhere to go. And yet there's legislation which actually protects their right of, to remain on those farms. So when they go into a police station, they find that the police are completely blank. I mean, they simply, treat the case on the basis of who the owner is.
Yeah.
And if you say, well, you are not the owner, they'll say, well, don't come and waste our time, please move along.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are things, and what you're touching on is very important, because it almost seems that the legislation is there, and we know that. We've always been praised for some of the most incredible legislative laws that we have in place. Our constitution is amazing. The problem is how it's implemented.
Yes.
And that is what I'm gathering, is that a lot of people are being let down by authorities that are in charge, that should be implementing it properly, and yet they are not. And it's been happening for years, and people have been talking about it for years. How is it hoped that it can change now?
Well, we hope that through our report and recommendations, we can, put our finger on the nub of these problems of either lack of implementation or poor implementation, and or because some stakeholders actually feel that we are regulated, over-regulated, that there's just too many laws which only serve to complicate, their lives and so on. And others say that there's lacuna in gaps in legislation. And so we've got to point that out very clearly, so that the lawmakers can address those gaps here.
Getting to grips with people in South Africa and understanding their problems, I'm sure, opens up your eyes, because it's very easy to live in a bubble and think that everything is fine. The policies is there and everything is fine. But when you actually go out and you speak to South Africans, you understand the deep-seated problems of deep inequalities, high levels of illiteracy. That's something I'm sure you've seen. The landless communities. These are things that people have been shouting and complaining about for such a long time, and their lives are not improving. They're in fact getting worse by the year. And corruption always seems to be at the heart of it, by officials that are in charge that are not doing it. How do you get around corruption? It's one thing trying to change legislation and looking at that, but what about the individuals that are in charge that are not doing their job properly?
Well, poor administration is corruption, is a form of corruption, actually, because it creates backlogs which then necessitate people to feel that they should grease palms or offer sweeteners in order to receive services that they are entitled to. So the best way to deal with corruption, I mean, it's also it also involves selection and appointment of public servants, as well as public office bearers. That the selection procedures must be such that only the best can be
given
those responsibilities.
Yeah, and that's what we strive for, is to
that's
put
what
the
we
best
strive for.
in those right positions. We seeing this today in Johannesburg. I can imagine lots is going to come out here. You move to the Western Cape and then you complete it next year. When are you hoping that the whole report will be finalized and the panel will come to its conclusions?
Well, we're hoping that by end of March next year we'll have an interim report, and by end of July we should have a final report.
Fantastic. We wish you the best of luck.
Thank
you for stopping by and talking to us. We really are honoured and appreciate your presence here.
Thank you very much, Leanne.
This is our former president here sitting with us in studio, Kgalema Motlanthe, and of course this high-level panel on the assessment of key legislation and the acceleration of fundamental change, holding its 5th provincial public hearing. This was yesterday and today at the Johannesburg City Hall, and Kgalema Motlanthe is heading up this particular high-level panel.